Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest stream. Today we're going to be covering politics and art and the kind of interplay between them. Tonight I'm joined by our, regular co-host now, Alexander Adams, Art. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Diversity is our strength, comrades.
And unfortunately, Panama couldn't make it tonight, so we've been joined by Al the Shiatori. Now, apparently, his name is actually AI Shiatori, but I've always known him as Al, so I refused to call him AI. Do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I mean, I think at this stage I'm gonna have to let that battle go. Because no one else is calling me AI. Only me's calling me AI. So it's a losing battle.
Okay, great. So just in terms of today, I think there's loads of different angles that we can kind of approach with this. But what I thought could be interesting is maybe starting to talk about the history of the political artist. Where does it come from? Some of the kind of earliest examples. So, Alex, I don't know if you want to kick us off with some who you think is kind of like some of the first important examples, and go from there.
Okay, well, first I have to acknowledge all those incredible zingers that I get in the comment sections for my articles, because every time I write an article pointing out the foolishness of political artists today, I get some very clever person commenting that, don't you realise that all art is political? And yes, I do realise that all art is political to a degree. I studied art history and I've written a lot about it. So yes, I'm quite aware that there is a political undercurrent to even a lot of art that seems apolitical. But what I tend to decry is when people go into art and they have not only primarily a political intention, but only a political ability and a political viewpoint. They don't have an aesthetic viewpoint or a personal viewpoint. I mean, Guernica, I'm sure we'll be talking about other areas, but for example, Guernica only works because it's the work of a very significant artist. Whatever you think of Picasso, he thought quite seriously, and he was very deeply involved in mythology and symbolism, and also he had sort of personal interpretations of various myths and so forth. And that's what gave his political comment weight, was the fact that he could combine this with a deep understanding of history and mythology, combined with his own political interpretation of events. So I think that that's a good example of a relatively successful political work of art.
Yes, so I guess when we're talking about political art, there is art with a political message or a political purpose. But then I guess what the snarky commenters are going on about is that we're not creating art in a vacuum. You're influenced by different sides. So again, someone that I was immediately thinking of would be like Dante, where he's in the middle of the fight between the Ghibellines and the I can't remember the other names, the other political faction that's going on, and that's actually pulled into his poetry and to his work, and often he kind of has that as a crypto political message in some of his work as well. So you've got that kind of I guess a piece of work that is political in subject matter. You've got a piece of work which has these kind of political influence, and then maybe that kind of third level, which is the artist had no intention of like a political element to it, but it's still being pulled in from somewhere, just because. Is everything politics? I guess you can go a bit meta on the.
I think so. Obviously, if you take it to a granular level, sort of buying a bar of soap is a political act. But obviously, you know, and it's also it's sort of, you know, it's a moral act as well. You know, there are all sorts of different ways of interpreting it. But yeah, I would say someone like, you know, Dante, where he's combining he's settling some personal grievances along with making some moral comments and also some political comments. That's a perfect example of a sort of an integrated work of art, which has lasted as long as it has because it's so rich and so complex. And I think the best works of art can have a political dimension. So we're definitely going to be criticizing political art and political artists, but I think that it's fair to acknowledge that there is art with a political dimension that can be successful, and art that has sort of unintended political undertones, which can also be successful and is interesting and informative from a historical point of view.
Okay, great. So where do you think kind of the first like truly political artists kind of comes from, or do you think it's always been there in art?
Well, I mean, I think obviously you've got to go back to sort of court decoration in Greece and Assyria and so forth. Every time you've got any sort of civilization that wants to leave a lasting mark, then of course they turn to art and artists, and of course they're recruiting the best artists, sometimes foreign artists, and they're bringing them in to work for them. And of course, anyone who's working for the glory of the king is also, you know, upholding the status of the monarchy, the status of the nation, or the, you know, the city-state in the example of Greece. And of course, the construction of the Parthenon. The Parthenon was funded by the Delian League, the tributes of the Delian League. The Delian League is essentially either a mutual defense organization, or it's an empire, or yeah, I mean, there's different ways of interpreting it. But anyway, the Parthenon in Athens is a great example of a work of art which has political undertones because it was constructed using funds from a political union, is perhaps a generous way of putting it.
Yeah, but was this for the Persian Wars? Is that right?
Yes, it was. Yes, I think it was. Yeah, it was the time of Pericles, anyway.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, because I like that idea of, you know, NATO nowadays just creating a really kick-ass building. Just I don't think you get that.
Don't give them ideas, Pharaoh, because you know it'd be like a large monstrosity if they did.
I guess actually something like the US Embassy would be a good modern example of that. Have you seen the latest example of that, guys?
No, I haven't seen the new one. What can you tell us?
You know, maybe I'll bring it up. Hold on a second.
But you have to see it to understand it, I guess.
Well,
so
I know
obviously, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Well, I know that, for example, we will get onto it later, but the Government Art Collection and the British Council are two wings of the government which involve soft power. British government, which involves soft power, to do with projecting the idea of what Britain is and what Britain should be. And so you'll see they collect and exhibit art of a certain type.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen the older one from the 70s, but it's kind of like a concrete brutalist fort. I mean, I've been past it a few times, and then I think under
I think it was basically built as a bunker, so that because they were expecting to get bombed at some stage.
Yeah, exactly. Again, yeah, because they obviously had so many problems, but you know, this was created not so long ago, and maybe it's got a date for when it came out. But I think there's a few things like the addition of the moat. You know, that's what people call it. Is literally where around it.
Are they using sharks or piranhas for that?
Sharks with lasers on them. This is America.
In an interview, I remember the ambassador at the time saying that the idea was to host grand dinner parties for because originally he wanted the garden, I think if I remember correctly, was to be slightly smaller, the patio area as well was to be slightly smaller, but he wanted a grand area for garden parties because obviously being the American embassy, he was expecting many guests to attend frequently.
Yeah, so like I don't think I think they ended up with like a lot of walk around area, and then a few bits of garden space. But like I personally feel like things like the kind of interlocking mesh around the outside and the moat, and then there's a lot of concrete in it still. It seems to me like some like chainmail armor. You know, as a building, as a political statement, this is all about defense and strength and invoking a fortress of the past. Even the cube itself is kind of like a fort. Like
yeah, I was going to say if you look at any Norman fort in England, it is exactly the same sort of shape.
Yeah, like the keep part, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say no. Oh, that one, yeah, the one that you click. Now that is what I guess your early Norman forts after 1066 would those the sort of ones would be dotted. So it'd be like where I am in the West Country, you had one at Launceston, which and all of them were mostly expanded on, but there's one near Dartmoor, where it is the village itself is just known as the castle, and it is just a mound and a fort, similar, in shape wise to what you got on screen there. Slightly gutted though, but it's still standing. And yeah, it's very similar, I guess you could say, to that. I mean, well, obviously in a modern sense, an up-to-date sense, but it's similar sort of shape.
Yeah. So I guess when talking about political art, it could be I'm pretty sure it must be intentional with like some of the kind of visions and values they're putting into this, or that's kind of what the architect was drawing from. But going back to the Parthenon example, because I remember some of the frieze works on that, for example, there is kind of like battle scenes as well. So it's
a battle of the centaurs and the lapiths, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like invoking the actual moment itself, or like the moment of battle, and it
was dedicated to the goddess Athene, Pallas Athene. That's it. Yeah, it's the goddess of victory.
It's got like on one of the main frescoes. It's got her coming out. Is it like out of like a Zeus's head, isn't it? She's like a headache.
It was there. I think it's gone now. But I think the pediments have mainly gone.
Yeah.
But they do have some fragments. Mainly, the best parts are of the friezes, because the metopes mainly because they're so sort of small and self-contained that they say a lot of them survived relatively intact, whereas the main areas have largely gone.
Yeah, like the pediment statues and stuff. Yeah, yeah. That's like the part of the centaur fights, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So obviously, this is a way of Athens claiming that it is sort of by divine right, it is the upholder of justice and strength of the Greeks. I mean, obviously, there's some question about how the Greeks define themselves, but there was sort of obviously claiming status from the construction of such an imposing building with such sublime works of art. And of course, they were using this as a political statement. And I think when we talk about the Renaissance, we're going to talk a lot about the way temporal rulers used art to bolster their claims to be descendants of the patrons of the past and so forth.
Well, I want to stick in classical for a bit longer, because again, I think there's something interesting here where, Athens and Sparta were the kind of two like major axes within the kind of early Greek world. Yeah. And again, I think obviously Sparta, correct me if I'm wrong, has had no artistic production of any significance whatsoever.
I think that's the consensus. Yes.
Yeah, nothing. Because obviously they were around Corinth sort of region, and yeah, nothing compared. But one thing that was quite interesting if you look at the Athenian, I guess you could say the sort of Athenian culture, because obviously it was a city, effectively birthed of a city-state. There was, especially in the early period, there was very much unknown and I guess you could say of the wild, of the wilderness, because you have to remember the Spartans were scavengers. I mean, they used to scavenge. They were, I mean, considered wild men. And then you look at the Macedonians to the north and everything. So, very much, I imagine with a lot of the Athenians, images like this is, you could also say it's like a warning, beyond the walls in the wilderness. You got all, you got all these mythological creatures, and so I guess for them, I always thought that a lot of it was sort of showing their dominance over the rural countryside, over the wilderness, and also acting as a warning as well.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting propagandic angle on this, where again it's kind of like they're setting themselves up as the heart of civilization. Look at all of the stuff we've got, because we've got art, we're culture. Because we've got the school of Athens, we've got the philosophy. We are the center of civilization. Sparta's got none of that. Like you said, it's interesting how we see them. I think we see so much of Greece today through the lens of Athens, because they're the ones who control the history, they're the ones who control the culture, and I bet to the Spartans they didn't consider themselves to be scavengers at all. They probably thought that the Athenians were foppish wets that needed to be taught a lesson on in battle, and obviously it was the
dangerous cosmopolitans, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Rootless cosmopolitan Athenians versus traditional Spartan moral tradition. But I think that in itself just shows you the power of art and as a political statement, because we're viewing history through that lens, basically, through the eyes of an Athenian and rather than a Spartan.
Well, it's a very political act to use your wealth to spend that on art rather than naturally on defense. They also spent it on defenses, of course, and on their triremes, but to spend so much on architecture and art, that in itself is a political statement.
And also they made active efforts to become that kind of central civilization point, trying to get art, like they cultivated it as well through a system of patronage and offerings. One thing that's quite cool is I don't know if either of you guys have been up to the site of Delphi in Greece.
No. I know it. It's yes, I've seen many National Geographic documentaries on it.
Yeah, it's kind of up in the mountains. So it's super cold, actually. Well, when I was there, and but basically you have this kind of ascent up to the temples, and then a lot of, obviously all of the statues were basically destroyed and lost to time, but the statue, it is they have a lot of what they call votive offerings. So it's kind of like a town or a city or a wealthy individual would donate a statue as an offering to the gods, and so there's a politico-religious element to it as well. So say, for example, if you're a wealthy town or village, maybe not necessarily a city-state, you could increase your status by having a great offering to Apollo, and your statue would be seen on the way up. So there is the war for soft power has been going on for years, and it was recognized very early on as a powerful way of capturing identity. Moving on from the Greeks, I think we talked about kind of inheriting artistic and political culture. We've got to talk about the Romans. Obviously, they stole. Well, okay, stole's a strong word, but a lot of their early sculpture is essentially copies from Greece.
Well, I mean, you could say that they were actually keeping the Greeks alive by patronizing them, by getting them to produce all these copies, because most of the copies are actually copies made by Greeks in Greek studios. They've done surveys and they've discovered the sources of marble, and marble is local to Greece, and it was worked in Greece before it was being exported to Rome and the Roman provinces.
Yeah. Also, on Alexander's point is that remember, after the Peloponnesian Wars, you had, I guess you could say, the expansion of Greeks within southern Italy, and especially with like the various kingdoms like the Syracuse and southern Italy, and you had what would become core Roman territories had fantastic temples, Greek temples, centered on. I mean, I think there's like it's near. It's I'm just trying to think. It's just south of Naples. You have hills dotted of various temples for Apollo and Neptune and such, and those were, I guess, for the Romans, because to the north, the only culture that you could have. I don't know about the architecture. I don't have anything to know too well of the Etruscan societies, because I always believed that because I always thought with the Etruscans that it was a combination of Etruscan and Greek, which sort of gave birth to Roman. It was like sort of a hybrid mutation of both.
We can't talk about the Etruscans without. I had to bring up have you seen the Chimera of Arezzo before? It's just quality piece of sculpture.
It's beautiful.
So the Etruscans actually have quite a lot of art going on beforehand. They have their own pantheon of gods, which is very similar but different to the Greco-Romans. But I think you're right in the fact that there is these kind of artistic traditions that the Romans do pull in. But then it's really interesting, Alexander, what you're saying about them supporting Greek patrons, and actually after Greece gets conquered by the Romans, that they maintain a cultural integrity through their art at the same time. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of Romanization that goes on.
And you've got to understand that a lot of Roman rhetoricians and writers and thinkers, they went to Greece specifically to study. They went to study in the schools of Greece before returning to Rome. And so obviously this had a huge impact on their on the culture of Rome, so that you had a lot of the Stoics writing actually in, although they were Romans, they were actually writing in Greek.
Yeah, so you got that kind of connection, but
I don't know any other peoples within an empire who, I guess you could say, have been conquered over a period of time, which still remained the dominant cultural force. I know it's a bit debatable whether you're Greek or Roman. I think in the grand schemes, I think the Greeks were the ones that still dominated the culture within the Roman Empire well into the fall of the West, at least.
The impression I get is that again, from a political and from a religious perspective, the Romans are all about assimilating ideas and other gods, like the Sibylline texts or Isis from Egypt, etc. And again, like part of their success is their ability to capture places, to assimilate, but then to place their stamp of authority on that place as well. And they sort of did that with Greece, but like you said, it managed to survive to a degree for a long period of time.
Well, you could say it eventually became the inheritor, because of course you had Byzantium. So of course that ultimately that was a Greek speaking Eastern Roman Empire.
Definitely. Well, moving on, I want to go to the Renaissance in a second, but there is one example that I think is worth talking about. We're talking about art and politics, and that is Persia. So, after, well, like contemporary to Roman, and mentioning the Byzantines, the space that we call Persia today was kind of occupied by descendants of Alexander the Great under the kind of Parthian dominion. So, have you heard of the Parthians before?
Yeah. So I mean, I know that after Alexander the Great, it was his general Seleucids who carved out, I guess you could say, parts of modern Turkey, Middle East, and parts of Persia. And then you had like the Greco-Bactrian kingdom.
Because there were three kingdoms, weren't there, that inherited?
Yeah, there was a Greek kingdom in Afghanistan which didn't fare too well. Though again, you're out there, their architecture had a lasting. It blended with the Hindu and the Buddhist cultures as well. But it didn't. From I don't know if there's I don't know if there's any like remnants out in Afghanistan of any Greek in those sort of areas of Greek culture or Greek architecture or anything like that. But I mean, yes, the Seleucids. That was quite interesting because I know that with Alexander, upon conquest, he ordered his top men, I guess you say officers, to marry. I mean, I think it was like a mass marriage of Persian women to sort of indicate that this was an alliance, I guess, and a cultural alliance with the Persians and the Greeks.
And also he was criticized specifically for adopting Oriental airs because he started dressing as a Persian, and and people prostrated themselves in front of him and so forth, and he was criticized from this specifically because he was adopting an Eastern culture which was considered unmanly by the Macedonians.
I like the fact that the East has always been considered, again, that kind of luxuriant, licentious nature to it or whatever. But
it's always been considered traditionally female as well. It's been characterized as the emotional, illogical, mysterious, irrational East, which is the feminine, and then the masculine is the male, rational, logical, materialistic West, and so forth. And you find this criticism. This comes up again in the criticism of Orientalism, according to Edward Said and others.
With the kind of post-colonial stuff. That's interesting. What I wanted to bring up with these guys was that obviously in Persia for a long time, basically there's this Hellenistic domination from a cultural perspective. But with the change of power to the House of Sasan in around about, I think it's 260 AD, there's like a new cultural wave that comes through. And so you've got this change of elites from, again, these Hellenized Greek-speaking elites descended from Alexander, because I think the Seleucids do end up being the Parthians, basically. But as part of that kind of re-establishing of their empire, they try and sort of go back culturally to before Alexander the Great in their art at the same time. So they're trying to reconnect with the past. Now, bear in mind, like Xerxes is like 400 years before the Sasanians. Or maybe I'll just bring some stuff up.
I say, if you bring up the Sassanid, the Sasanian, and the Achaemenids, like flags, for instance, I mean, you can see that they definitely took inspiration from the Achaemenids, and that's like the empire before.
I can't spell it. How do you spell it? Literally,
I think it's ACH.
Communion.
I think it's if you hang on a sec, let me just check because I can't spell it.
You put it. If you could work it out, I'll just talk through the Sasan stuff for now. But basically, obviously, the Greek figure, he is clean shaven. He is riding a horse, but you got things like this kind of like they're really big into plates, the Sasanians, and you can see here he's a camel rider with a lovely, Persian, almost like Assyrian beard that you would see on like the walls of You know,
Nineveh.
Yeah, exactly.
Nimrod.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting how basically, as part of their turnover of elites and the establishment of a new cultural hegemony, they tied into their own past to try and sort of create something new and reconnect and say, look, the Greek stuff's gone out. We're the inheritors from the past itself, but they're sort of riffing off themselves, which you don't often get. Like the only other example I was thinking of is maybe things like the Tale of King Arthur, and in England, because that's something that's constantly referenced. But you know, we reference it in an English context, but obviously, you know, we're technically Anglo-Saxons, and King Arthur was a Briton and stuff like that. So there's interesting questions around, you know, where are you pulling those ideas from?
Yeah, because archaism is something that comes up, especially with something like the pre-Raphaelites and so forth, and the arts and crafts movement, and where they're deliberately going back to a sort of a medieval or even pre-medieval world in order to sort of return to a sense of something particularly grounded or lacking sophistication. You know, the search for authenticity.
Yeah, exactly. There's one other thing I wanted to bring up with the Sasanians, and that was with some of their sculpture, because obviously their big rival is the Byzantines, and they do manage to capture a series of emperors, but they basically get Romans to do the sculpture work, and so it's kind of like they're using the art form of the conquered to kind of show their victory, which I thought was quite an interesting interplay between that art and power at the same time, where it's kind of like, you know, we're so good that we dominate even the art itself. But yeah, that's. Did you manage to? Have we managed to spell Achaemenian yet?
Yes, he's got it in the private chat.
Yeah, I've got it in the chat, private chat.
There we go.
I was just also looking because I just remember this is from that time period, and I don't know if you two probably know what I'm talking about. They are they're like these really big rams in Iraq. Do you know which ones I'm talking about? I can't remember the names of them. And I think,
are you talking about the winged bulls or not?
Possibly.
Well, you think about that. That's an example of the beard that was going on. So you can see the clear similarities in kind of like beard style and dress that trying to hark back to from this kind of like cultural inheritance point of view and making a statement through their art. But obviously, what's interesting is that they lost a lot of the art forms in between. So again, the Achaemenids, they're really famous for, again, these kind of amazingly beautiful tiled relief walls. So there's a few in the British Museum out there, but and
it's interesting when do you remember the reconstruction that Saddam Hussein had of the Gates of Babylon?
Okay, no, I don't know.
Where they, if you look up Saddam Hussein Babylon gates, you'll see that he actually made a modern recreation of the blue tiles. There you are. Yeah, the blue tiled walls of the gate to Babylon. And this is obviously him sort of claiming himself as the political heir.
Yeah, even look at this relief here. This is high art, right? Right here. Saddam looking into the past,
and it's Sargon. He's looking at Sargon. He's modelled himself on Sargon.
That's actually great.
Quite literally. We're not joking.
That's literally hilarious.
The original Sargon, not our current Sargon.
Yeah. So this is this the original? Is this in the Pergamon Museum in Germany? I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, look again. This is the true art. Basically, look, he's literally got like a kind of Persian relief, and then his head in. No, that's actually hilarious. I didn't know that at all. I mean, it's. I was
going to say, unfortunately, some of it was. I think some of Babylon was because the Americans were stationed out there, and I think part of it, or like a few structures of it, were damaged during the Second Gulf War.
It became, there were several sort of military bases there, and now the architects of archaeologists have looked at it, and they've now said that the debris and the sort of the different rubbish that the Americans have done and the amount of disruption and so forth has actually added a layer of archaeology to this historical site. So now you have the American occupation period, which is now a distinct archaeological period, which they superimposed by accident on these historical sites.
I'm just imagining like a layer of Twinkie wrappers that are discovered by you'll have things like lots of shell casings, you'll have nuts and bolts, you'll have ration packs and stuff like that, and that is actually sort of now part of the architectural fabric, the archaeological fabric of some of these historic sites.
You think about how many empires and societies. I mean, you got your Alexanders, you got your Sassanid, your Parthians, your Sassanids, your Russian caliphates, Umayyads, Abbasids, and Mongols and such, and the Americans.
Yeah.
So is there anything medieval we want to bring up at all before you hit the Renaissance?
Well, I think basically we just need to say that in the medieval period, you have the church being the principal patron of the arts. So obviously this directs what is produced, who it's produced for. It dictates the subjects, it dictates the sizes, sometimes it dictates the material, because you have specific contracts saying, a certain amount of this pigment will be used, a certain amount of gold will be used, it will be of a certain size, it will show Our Lady plus this saint and that saint, plus maybe a donor, so the donor was included in the portrait and so forth. I mean, this is slight. Okay, well, we're getting into Renaissance territory, really, but it basically, in the medieval period, you've got the state, and to a much lesser degree, you've got the court, who are the principal patrons of art, and so obviously they're having a direct influence on what art is being financed and what art is being produced.
And I guess in contrast to the classical world, so we're saying in the classical, there is a bit of religious work, but it tends to be funded mainly by those wealthier individuals. So again, like the Parthenon, like we said, was literally by a whole lot of wealthy guys, as opposed to having this like the church being this centralized global authority, if that makes sense. So I think there's a big differentiation there. Even though there are these religious buildings, they're typically patronized by people, aren't they? So they had a lot more.
Yeah. So part of what my research, because I've recently written. This is relevant. It's not just a plug. I recently wrote a book called Iconoclasm, Identity, Politics, and the Erasure of History. And in that, I talked about the dissolution of monasteries and the Reformation. And so obviously I wanted to research what attitudes were from the British population towards the Catholic Church as it was then. And what was the degree of resentment or lack of resentment. And I think it's fair to say that it's quite mixed, but I think that on the whole, there was not a huge degree of resentment towards the church per se. There was resentment towards corruption. But what an interesting point was, that something that I hadn't realized was that some of the glories of the churches, the medieval churches, were actually donations. They were not from tithes, they were from donations from landowners or wealthy traders, merchants, and so forth. And so these were not actually the funds of the local population, these were the funds of particular rich families. And interestingly enough, many of the glories of these churches were not owned by the church, they were actually owned by the donor families, and the donor families still had ownership of these works even generations later, although they were entrusted to the care of the church. So for example, a stained window or a sculpture or an altarpiece may have been commissioned by a family and it was still owned by that family, although it was housed by the specific church it was in.
That's brilliant. That's really interesting. You know how you often find like legacy hunters, where you have like guys trying to reconnect people with lost family treasure. I like the idea of starting an agency where you can find that stained glass window that the Church of England still owns you. No, okay, that's definitely interesting. I was going to bring up a title actually, because you mentioned tithing. Have you seen a lot of these? Because they're so these are obviously kind of halls that you kind of store your stuff inside. Okay, they've all been turned to wedding venues nowadays.
There's one. If you go back to the maps, there's one in Stratford upon Avon, which is completely empty. Well, obviously it wasn't empty back in the day, but it's empty. So there we go. That's the one I've been in, and again, the windows are in the shape of. It's really funny because it looks like. I had a bit of a debate with my my parents on this actually, because it's in the shape of a crucifix initially, but when I got inside, it looked like the shape of a sword.
So is that the shape of what, sorry?
Sorry, the windows on that I was saying that it looks like the shape of a crucifix.
Yes,
yeah. But then when you get inside, it looks like swords, especially when you have the light coming in. And so I just thought that was because I was thinking to myself, because it didn't look like a perfect crucifix if I was honest, but I thought, well, maybe it was there was a reason, maybe it was like just practicality reasons for light and stuff like that. But I mean, you can see it there, where it's quite lit up and everything.
But I guess why I wanted to kind of bring this up, that again, this is a building. This is a distinctly political building. It's time was a hugely important part of the kind of community, a part of the seasons, where again the church would collect their 10% or whatever from the local land, and again, they were kind of big land owners themselves. And again, that's tied into so its utility, its purpose is tied into politics to a degree, and its design obviously chosen by the church. I like this one because it almost looks like a mini church. It's kind of like a bit like a large nave. You've got kind of buttresses, so this could be like a really small Romanesque church at the same time. So again, that's that kind of the political power of the Catholic Church coming through.
And also to get back to the roofing, you can see that, and this is something that it's quite amazing, especially when I was younger. There is not a single nail in any of the beams or anything like that. It is all as it was back then, just fitted in.
So it's with pegs, isn't it? It's with
pegs,
pegs and holes.
And the rest is gravity. Really. So I mean, again, it's a fantastic structure.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't think, and it hasn't. I mean, this is. I mean, the trouble is, in England, a lot of tithes were during the reign of Henry VIII, during the Reformation period. Our Reformation period, a lot of tithe barns were destroyed, or changed and built upon, or what have you. So for having for this is quite good, and it's still actually on, like, if you it's actually still on a farming estate, this particular tithe barn.
That's interesting. Yeah, just on that, I guess for some people, the tithe barn is a symbol of oppression, a symbol of you're having to give up your hard-earned goods to those kind of corrupt church officials as well. So I do wonder whether a lot of irate locals would have been like quite happy to set fire to it in an iconoclastic kind of way, but it's hard to tell. One thing that, like, speaking of iconoclasm, and I guess this is going back slightly beforehand, but during that first Byzantine iconoclasm, again, part of the reason why they decided to abandon their icons is political as well. They lose a series of battles to the Saracen invaders, and again, this is the kind of readings I've read historically, and basically a lot of the discussion internally is kind of like, look, we need to be more like the Saracens. They don't have any of these offensive icons. If we can always kind of purge ourselves of those, then we're going to start winning battles again. So again, that part of iconoclasm in the Byzantine context is it's a political act to try and help them win wars, basically.
Well, I when I was doing my research, I got a little bit of there was some pushback on that because let me know. Oh yes, Leslie Brubaker and John Haldon wrote the largest book on this subject, which came out quite recently, on Byzantium and the iconoclasm, and they said basically the influence of the East is less than has been suggested. The people were perhaps less influenced by the threat of Islam and the ideas of Islam, but more related. It was more an internal matter, and that there was a great deal of internal dissent about if icons were getting in the way of worship or whether they were facilitating worship. So they have a slightly different interpretation, but you're right, that is one interpretation.
You also have to look at where the origins of this is 9th century iconoclasm we're going off here, because you obviously had the ones that during Theodosian, the Great's period, in the 5th century. But 4th century even. But with this one, if you look at the origins of it, it wasn't in Constantinople or Ephesus or Tarsus. It wasn't in like the major cities at the time. It was within the sort of rural Anatolian countryside, where you had the movement of the iconoclasts, which were, I guess, unhappy monks, unhappy people with the, I guess, what they viewed to be unchristian or unorthodox, the iconography. And I mean, I think there was some element there that there was, I guess, drawing the conclusion that they knew that something wasn't right. The fact that more and more land of more and more territory of the Byzantines was being conquered by the various Islamic caliphates.
Yeah, this was seen as a warning about the sinfulness or the lack of the lack of sort of probity of the leaders of Christendom.
Yeah, and also it's been programmed. I mean, it was quite normal because obviously we talk about the iconoclast this period in 9th century, but you could argue much disruption had been done before that, because I just sort of referenced it there. But during the reign of Theodosian the Great, it was during his time you had the Serapeum in Alexandria in Egypt was effectively ransacked and then converted into a Christian church, and then similar thing happened with Delphine as well. That's where that's where the site was attacked by. We don't really know. I mean, there's some suggestion that it was radical monks and then locals. Others said it was Roman soldiers at the time. So we don't know. And then of course you had like the altar of victory in Rome, and the Pantheon, and all these sort of what would have been pagan and traditional sites. So it was quite. It wasn't. I guess it wasn't entirely out of the blue in the sort of Byzantine Greek Christian culture at that point, because they already sort of went through the sort of the purging of the pagan iconography.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit later. Just as we come to the kind of end of the medieval period, I guess for me, what's interesting is that kind of the shift of patronage away from the church and to, I guess, powerful political figures and powerful I guess, kind of economic figures in the form of merchants. I've got a couple of portraits that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think also a good point of reference is the rise of the banking system, the modern banking system, which happens in northern and central Italy in the sort of 13th, 14th century.
So this is the first one I wanted to bring up was Van Eyck's Chancellor Rollin.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you can see here, this is Rollin across here. We've got the Madonna, baby Jesus. But I absolutely adore this this artwork. It's one of Van Eyck's greatest pieces. It's kind of got loads of little details in it. But I guess there are a lot of these kind of quasi-ecclesiastical paintings with the patron shoehorned in, but I think certainly Rollin has one of the biggest roles to play in the piece. So, for example, if you see like stained glass, maybe the patron would get like one window out of 20 or something like that, or there'll be a small piece. You see Rollin here. He's almost the same height as Mary. He's taking up almost as much space. He's dressed in these amazing like cloth of gold Florentine velvets with ermine fur, while still like being holy. I think there's a weird juxtaposition of, he's meant to be not tied to the earth, but he's got all of these kind of trappings of wealth.
I think that what you often get is the idea that the glories of the world come about through hard work and virtue, and that these are then dedicated to the glory of God. So this is sort of, it's an interesting combination.
Yeah, it's sort of I guess it's, if you devote the sort of your wealth from hard work and then sort of devote it to the glory of God, it's sort of sidesteps around I guess you agreed church positions on that.
I've seen a very fascinating interpretation of I think it's Peter Marshall's discussion about the Reformation, and he talks about basically a necrocracy, because what you had very powerful donors who would donate large amounts of money to have their souls prayed for. So they would endow a religious institution. So this would be a monastery, a nunnery, or an abbey or something. And they would give them a large amount of money, and they would say, please burn this many candles on this many days and say this many prayers for me, and so forth. And so you had whole communities which were dedicated to praying for the souls of the dead, and that this became a major economic factor, which is quite a fascinating thing I'd never thought of.
I love the idea of like some kind of dystopian civilization where everyone's just kind of carrying out the wishes of dead people. There's no
absolutely and so because the souls were considered to be, they were at risk, because if you did not pray for them, then they would be cast into damnation, or they wouldn't progress through purgatory. So you had this system where you had people paying for the future generations to follow their wishes.
But there was actually the funny thing about that, there was a serious financial effect from that, because it sort of turned out, especially during like the First Crusade, where you had a lot of the I guess you say lesser nobility who took part. The Pope at the time, he had to justify I guess you could say the concept of a holy war or just war, because that sort of idea, when whole communities or whole monasteries would devote for one individual, and you think how many men sort of wealthy lesser nobility men would be going off, it would have a serious strain on the economy, on those local economies. So there was the church was quite flexible in their doctrine when it came to that, and so they adopted new positions, because it did cause some problems.
Just going back to this painting a second, just talking about kind of patronage and power. I think for me, something like this painting, this is all about explaining who Chancellor Rollin is, what he believes, that he's a powerful man, that he's well respected, that he's a godly man. But this is quite a different painting to something that the church would create as well, just like a pure. I guess maybe bishops would kind of be featured in some medieval paintings as well, but I think so. Rollin's like a chancellor in the Burgundians, the Burgundian Empire. So again, he's like a secular position. But
I think it's the Duchy of Burgundy. I think it was.
Okay, sorry.
I'm not sure. I might be wrong about that. I think because there's definitely the Duke of Burgundy later on.
Yeah, that's true. But like I guess for me this marks a fundamental change, and I guess maybe more back to that kind of classical views of patronage at the same time. Should we move on to the Renaissance then? So, Alexander, what's your thoughts on art in the Renaissance? And if you want to bring up anything, just shout, and I can.
Bring up your favorite Medici works, because I think it's the court of Medici is famous for sort of Neoplatonism. So this is basically the idea that not only would you that cultured. I think this is very interesting because we talk about culture and the idea of elites separating themselves from the mainstream culture. Well, one of the ways that the elites would distinguish themselves from the mainstream culture was that they would start to explore paganism and the Greek and Roman history. So then they would start separating themselves out from purely Christian imagery, and they would start weaving in this sort of foreign and decadent and pagan stuff. I mean, I know that AA did his stream on the Weimar Republic and so forth, and there's been talk about decadence, and I think that the idea of the elite's connection to decadence and to foreign influences, foreign art, foreign taste, and so forth, that this is very well established. And the Neoplatonism was the revival of the ideas of Plato in the late 15th century by various thinkers who were patronized in the court of the Medicis and other famous families from the sort of from Tuscany and so forth. And so you get art like Botticelli's and so forth, where you start seeing medieval mythological images of the Greeks and the Romans coming up in a way that they had not previously. So this is the direct influence of secular court culture and banking money being used to revive ideas that were not strictly speaking Christian, although there was obviously a lot of attempts to try and fuse a sort of syncretism to try and fuse Christianity and Platonism.
Yeah, this is me just anecdotally looking through, but I feel like even in the 15th century, there's still quite a strong Christian angle on like subject matter, and like again, it's more of a classical style, but certainly like hitting the 1450s onwards. And again, Titian is peak paganism, isn't it? Really, but
and the rise of the nude as well, and the non-Christian subjects.
Yes. Sorry.
I was going to say one thing because I'll obviously go on to Medici, and I thought is an interesting one to follow is the procession of the Magyar in the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, the procession of is it Cosimo Medici? I think it's the Medici. I think it's like the various leaders of the Medici banking family. Yes, because obviously that's a reconstruction of I think it was Christ's travel to Jerusalem.
I'm not sure it's this one, because this one's the Gentili, I think, but he puts all the Medicis in there basically.
That's because I'm pretty certain he put I'm pretty certain he put some of the Medici, like Cosimo.
I guess what's also interesting with it with the Medici is that they're outside of that, either that court or church. Like you say, they are bankers. These are kind of like middle class people that through effectively the breakdown of the Byzantine Empire and the increase in trade routes and opportunity in that regard, all of us, and also the kind of post successor states in Jerusalem, etc. You've got these kind of upstarts with money and influence, and they're wanting to spend cash on art to again. They're almost trying to buy nobility, if that makes sense. And again, obviously the Medicis, they finally they do take over Florence eventually, but it takes a while, and then they get kicked out at several times. So art can be used as a way of almost kind of creating authority and legitimacy for yourself, which I think is quite interesting. But again, the Renaissance is definitely it's a marked change because of that kind of mercantile middle class coming through. Again, when I just stepping back and thinking about the amount of portraits, there's a lot more, portraits of people, like just by themselves as well, like compared to medieval art. One of the ones I wanted to bring up. In fact, I just want to talk about Botticelli for a second, actually, because again, isn't this the wife of one of the Medicis who was the model? Is that right?
So it's either a wife or a mistress. It usually
I think it's the mistress of Julie. Who was the one that was murdered in the Pazzi conspiracy in the cathedral? Was it? It was Lorenzo's brother. I think it was Giuliano. I think it was the mistress.
Yeah, I think
of one
it
of
was.
the other, that's her. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite a bold move. Again, certainly having like your mistress in a painting, plus she's naked, plus
although
she's pagan as well. Sorry.
Yeah, but also, I mean, you've got to remember that this is something that was being kept in the palace. It was not going to be available for the general public. So obviously, there's the idea of you've got sort of various inner sanctums that you would go through to reach particular pieces. Although obviously, invited guests would get to see this, but this would not necessarily be the sort of something that this would not be the sort of thing that people living in the city would get to see.
This would be like an insult to the husband of the husband of this woman, because I'm just trying to think about. I believe that he was a member of the Procuria, which is the city council in Florence. So this. But he wasn't like a major opposition figure. So I mean, like from the political side, this is definitely showing the authority over the various political factions within the city, because you have obviously the Medici, the main one, and then you would have the Pazzi, who would obviously be the rivals, who were the arch nemesis of the Medici family, as we know. And then of course you had the various other smaller members within there. But yeah, I mean, this definitely asserts their power, that because as you said, they would have guests round, and guests would have seen that, and its chances are guests would know this particular woman and her husband.
Yeah, I want to talk about the rivalry between city-states in a second, but I just wanted to have another one of a second kind of portrait of this kind of mercantile class, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Lotto portrait of Andrea Odoni, who is like a Venetian merchant. But I really love I love portraits where they're kind of trying to tell a story, and again explaining all about the kind of character, and you have to read all those kind of the hidden symbology behind it. So you can tell he's a bank, or like he's a merchant or a kind of wealthy guy because of the coins on the table, and also his kind of outfit is part, like in the Venetian society, the different color kind of coat you would wear would show your level in society. So like only the top Venetians would wear kind of crimson robes, and then the black robes were for kind of the still a kind of oligarchical class, but slightly lower down. So he's kind of like upper middle class, but not true aristocracy, basically. But he's also he's a merchant, but also a collector, and you can see he's got all of these Roman sculptures, but a lot of them are of Hercules. So he's kind of showing off that he's this powerful Herculean man. He's also, someone's also pointed out that he's kind of holding onto the cross, his cross here, and kind of thrusting out. This is like I can't remember her name, but it's like the Tyrian Diana. She has loads of boobs, basically. I don't know if you've seen
Diana of Ephesus.
Yeah, maybe that's right. Yeah. But I think originally it was from the Phoenicians, basically. But anyway, but he's got that sculpture, and he's kind of thrusting it away while holding onto the cross. So people have suggested that that's like a rejection of paganism, and he's holding onto the cross. But at the same time, he's a patron of the arts. So again, I think I love what Lotto's trying to do with this portrait. And drawing you in by he's looking directly at you at the same time. You're going to capture the moment, but he's telling a story, and it's a story of power. It's a story about this guy, and I think it's interesting. There's an interesting thought about the kind of Medici. Like you said, that I like the idea of the painting being some kind of amuse-bouche as part of your kind of dinner party. You would bring your guests round and show your naked mistress on the wall as part of a party. But something like this could be in the family home, and you're kind of saying, this is the kind of person I am, this is what I believe, this is what I'm about. So it's very political. It's a political statement about the person, and that's portraits are very they're often propaganda, trying to get an idea across. And I don't mean propaganda in a negative sense. It's just they had an idealized vision of themselves that they're trying to bring across.
Well, sometimes you do have specifically propagandist portraits. So, for example, you'd have the portrait of a general or a prince who had won a victory, and that they would have sort of it depicted through a little window to the side of them. They would have some sort of burning. You'd have sort of armies, or you'd have like a burning city or something, and this would commemorate a particular victory. And of course, they might give this to they might sort of give this as a gift to another prince or a pope or something, just to remind them, what I've done for you in the past, and don't forget what I've done for you, and let's see if perhaps we can work together in the future, and so forth.
There's an interesting thing actually, just talking about gifts. I keep getting to, this is such an interesting area for me. I keep going down these little rabbit holes, but we can, when talking about kind of artist gifts, we could maybe bring up the Anne of Cleves, Holbein.
Okay, yes.
Just because obviously, so Henry VIII, when looking for his new wife, sent Holbein to paint Anne of Cleves in miniature and bring it back, and that was kind of like his way of seeing what she looked like beforehand. So again, you've got this, you've got art as an important ambassadorial technique. It's an important about making decisions.
It's a diplomatic tool.
Yeah, exactly. Which again, we don't necessarily think of all the time. But I also like the fact he just made her too pretty from supposedly from reality. Again, there's lots of debate about.
The one below your mouse is probably to the right. There it looks.
That's more like it, yeah.
More like it, probably more like it. Yeah, and he had that.
Yes.
He a very brave man to sort of lie to Henry VIII like that, and because obviously I imagine he must have known that he'd be found out. The fact that it's not how she really looks, but
I always think that Holbein is just looking for. He's just maybe he's just trying to pull the beauty out and pull the essence of the woman, but doesn't. Again, he's not necessarily a realist. Again, that's quite interesting. As like, did Holbein purposely do that, or is that just kind of like that's just the way that he saw? And just that, because again, a lot of his style is these kind of super stripped back, just a few lines. It's all everything's quite pale.
The drawings are absolutely incredible because there's just so little to them. They're so direct. I mean, it is very much like so the Holbein portrait drawings are just basically sort of outlines and just little tints. But they are incredibly realistic. I mean, this is sort of the advent of almost sort of hyperrealism.
But no, I like the idea of diplomacy through art as well. So just going into city-states, going back to city-states, I think there's an interesting thing about again, identity being expressed in art, and then and then kind of competing and fights being organized around it. And I'll just tell you a short story of an underappreciated art form, and that is the silk textile industry during the Renaissance. So these are this is I'm trying to find a nice example. This is actually a Florentine example, but basically the silk textile world kind of exploded in Italy during the Renaissance period, and it was centered around a small city-state called Lucca, which is like kind of north of Rome a little bit. But basically, they in around like 1300s, within 50 years, Florence literally goes to war with Lucca, and ends up basically stealing a lot of their weavers. And starts to create their own weaving empire. And again, obviously, Florentine silk is like that then becomes one of the main hubs of silk production. But what's interesting is at the same time, the Venetians steal a whole load of weavers from Constantinople as part of their Fourth Crusade shenanigans and start their alternative kind of silk empire. But each one of their each of their silks is kind of made in a specific way, all with little kind of symbology and kind of hints to kind of show it's from one area or the other. So you can tell that. So you've got these kind of two city-states at war, producing artistic content and producing product that is unique to their place. So it's kind of like, depending on what you wear, kind of shows who you are and who you support. I don't know if you saw the kind of, I brought up, did I get rid of it? Yeah, here you go. This is a wedding of the Medicis. And I don't know if you can see here on the right-hand side, this is a kind of a late Florentine silk pattern. So you can tell that she's a Medici because she's wearing Florentine silk. Another quite interesting example of this is what's Elizabeth I? Is it Mary Queen of Scots? Who's married Philip of Spain?
No,
it's the other one.
Was it Elizabeth?
Mary the First.
No, Bloody Mary, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So you can see across here in this portrait of Mary. So Mary's married to a Spaniard, and I don't know if you can see her dress down here. She's wearing Spanish silk, and you can tell that from the pattern and from the design, basically. So she's literally wearing a work of art, which is kind of it's almost like a political flag saying, I'm aligned to this faction at the same time. So I think there's something interesting around like just textiles themselves.
And she's holding the Tudor rose as well. Another political symbol. It's sort of like, because obviously she's married a foreign king, but she's still holding the symbol of England at the time, just to signify that this is this is still.
She's daughter of Henry VIII. So yeah.
There's something also interesting on fashion as well. So art as fashion. Again, this is kind of obviously quite lowbrow for the the what we usually talk about. But back in the Renaissance period, you get I think the first like national styles in dress where you're able to identify who people are based on what they wear. And if you look at I can't spell his name. Lucius Crank.
Cranach.
Is it Cranach? I've always been calling him Crank this entire time. But basically, the German style in women's outfits were to have these kind of puffy sleeves with slits in them. So you instantly knew if someone's a German by these kind of like pierced sleeves. Maybe I'll try and bring up another. Yes, you can see another example across here. You've got these kind of the puffy sleeves. So what you wear tells like someone where even where you're from, and it's kind of like it tells you about who you are. Another example of that is the sumptuary laws that were put in place. So Henry VIII, for example, put in a whole load of laws around what clothes people could wear and what they couldn't wear. So, for example, if you were a knight, you were able to wear like blue velvet. Like velvet was like the most cutting edge luxury material that has just hit the market, and so it was kind of super prestigious. So if you were a knight, you could wear that. If you were a lord or a marquis, you could wear red velvet, which is more expensive because of the dyes. And then if you were a king or within the direct court, you could wear cloth of gold, which is like pure, fabric made of pure gold. So again,
wasn't it the higher levels of the church could also wear? Was it purple or was it scarlet? Anyway, there was a sumptuary law to do with bishops or archbishops as well, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Was it burgundy color?
But there you go. There's the famous. I don't know if you remember the meeting between Henry VIII and was it the French king? And the field of the cloth of gold, and the king has his tent made out of that pure textile, golden textile. So again, textiles are a very underrated art form, but it says a lot about who you are and the power, and also your affiliations within a society. So it's a kind of a hidden clue.
And that was also monarchs also made a point of making gifts of something that they had control over, or that their nation was particularly famed for. So it became a diplomatic sort of soft power.
No, definitely. Is there anything else we want to talk about in the Renaissance period at all?
I was just going to say, as well, in the Renaissance period, the Borgia family, and in particular, I was thinking the portrait of a gentleman.
Which one?
The first one.
Is that Raphael?
I think it's Altabello.
Yes. Yeah, that's not Raphael. Yes.
Yeah, because again, with this, it's quite interesting because obviously his connection to him and his family's connection to the church, because this was the time when his father, Pope Alexander, or Rodrigo Borgia, was obviously on the throne of Saint Peter, and as the Pope, and I believe at this time, I know that he went from a cardinal then to another papal position. So he was within the papal establishment. But with this portrait, he's obviously his image is that heavily inspired of Jesus. And again, it's quite interesting because obviously he was known throughout throughout Italy as a young man who was very active, both military, because obviously during his time and his family's time as after his father became pope, you had problem with the Sforza family and very much internal in fighting, and then of course you had like the wars with the French over the succession of Naples to the south. So there was quite a hectic, quite a few things going on in Italy at the time. And so this was quite an interesting one because obviously he wants to come. I think this is like him wanting to come across as trying to say of how pious he is, even though that from his opponent's point of view he was seen as quite a bloodthirsty and violent young man.
Yeah, he was considered basically like a mob boss. I mean, he was incredibly violent.
Yeah.
He was very, very frightened. I mean, he was basically a warlord, essentially.
Pretty much. And the shame was, I can't remember who did the portraits for his sister, Lucrezia Borgia, but the portraits for her, I have to say, are pretty. Unless she looks like that, she might look like that. I don't know, but I just think something like the first one. I just think it's they don't usually show off in the best. Like
brutal. Yeah, I can't stop. I can't help but look at this and just think tiny hand. I don't know if is that just me.
And this is I think this is before he caught syphilis, wasn't it? Wasn't it? Wasn't his nose eaten away by syphilis?
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Because I know that one of his battles was essentially ended by basically half of his troops getting syphilis in the first outbreak of syphilis in Europe. And syphilis was a much more deadly disease right at the beginning, because diseases tend to become less dangerous over time. And when it initially broke out, that it was devastating both the French and the Italians.
Well, interestingly, I think because we used to call it the Dutch disease. The French would call it the Italian disease, and the Italians would call it the French disease.
Yeah, he called it the French disease. It was referred to as contemporaries at the time in the Papal States as the French disease. And I mean, yeah, obviously, you see, with the gloves, that sort of signifies to me at least that it's sort of saying he's got like soft hands, that he's got like soft, pure hands, and obviously. His hands and everything else about him is very far from soft and pure. As we stated, I mean he did a lot of he did a lot of stuff, and he killed a lot of people, and he slept with supposedly. I mean, this is the thing, because a lot of negative stuff we hear about the Borgia family comes from his opponents, like the Pope after him, Della Roveres and such. So there's always, I guess, you always a pinch of salt. But
I have thought of something else on the Renaissance actually, and that is Veronese's band portrait. So that. I think it's Veronese got. I hate this because you can all see how bad a spiller I am.
Well, you got Veronese wrong. It is Veronese.
Okay. I should have prepared this beforehand. Is it the feast at
the feast at Canaan?
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to remember.
That's very much sort of Baroque, isn't it?
Yeah, no, sorry. I think it's the feast at the House of Levi was the one that was banned. So basically, Veronese.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he's a Venetian painter, kind of contemporary to Titian, and he gets a commission to do this kind of religious painting, and basically, the church took him to court over the painting,
But before we get to the story, you have to point out that this is basically part of the Counter-Reformation, where we've had the Reformation, and then the Roman Church decides, well, actually, we're going to regulate much more closely the production of religious pictures. So I think this applies to what's going to happen.
I'm starting to doubt myself now. Maybe it's
no. I think no. That's right.
Yeah, I think that's the House of Levi. Is that what you want?
I forget. I can't remember, but I think it's quite interesting again that again. So we talked about the church influencing art from a commissioning point of view, but they could also kind of do this kind of soft power thing through again taking people to court or putting pressure on the people to kind of conform to certain kind of ideals. I think, for example, I sort of read the court transcription because that is actually handed down to us, and they literally like complain that there's like a German inside in the painting. I think as one of the there's a guy in a Germanic outfit, and that was like wouldn't be relevant or something. So
so basically, their case against him was that he was showing too much luxury, and that this was not fittingly humble. Was that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So again, you can see this. So obviously, your reality would have been Jesus in a small house, eating kind of bread and fish or whatever, and they've got him in kind of
in a palace, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. With
a cape. Is that a cape?
Gestures and everything. Yeah, exactly.
I don't mean to mock this, but is Jesus wearing a cape in this painting, or is
it could be?
But he's not. But he's not wearing leather gloves, so it's okay.
Okay.
So I thought that's another interesting example of this kind of power being used, and
because there was the Council of Trent, which was basically when they said, well, the church is going to have control over religious imagery. This was part of the Counter-Reformation and the what was the Spanish the Inquisition. Yeah, so this was all tied together with the Catholic Church reasserting its authority. And I think maybe the next thing that is worth discussing is maybe Dutch painting in the 17th century, where you see the rise of secular art, because essentially after the Reformation you had a period where in Holland you obviously had the big religious wars, and then in Holland you had this birth of the landscape, the marine, the still life, and so forth. You can find the origins of these a little bit earlier, but they essentially flower in the 17th century in Holland, because so you have like Rembrandt and so forth, and Howells and Vermeer and so on, and all this came about because essentially it was a Protestant nation, but obviously a large number of Catholics there, and so it became obviously under the Protestant Church there was a great reduction in the number of. Well, actually, I think it was pretty much banned that there was no new religious art made for Catholic, made for Protestant churches, and that the Catholics were basically doing things under the table and secretly, so they weren't really commissioning art or anything that was substantial. So what you have is the great birth of the trading empire of the Dutch, and they start to consume pictures, but these are more city views, these are secular subjects, so city views, still lifes, portraits, of course, banquet scenes, and you get a very rich array of subjects in the still life. So you had specialists, so people who would paint fish, people who would paint flowers, so you had flower paintings, of course. You had artists who spent their entire life painting such mundane things as sugar work, and sugar was fantastically expensive. So if you could afford a high quality painter of sugar work, this meant that you had access to pay for sugar work and also the painter and also the painting, and this was a demonstration of your status. So I think that this is maybe a good chance to look at the power of politics in secular art.
Yes, like I think there's a interesting, like I just brought up, this is what a church looks like.
Oh, you're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, you're sort of roboting a bit, Pharaoh.
Strip back, even art in some ways almost becomes, you know, totally associated with the Catholic Church, and part of your political identity is you want to move away from that, you know. So
going
these large
again.
bombastic pieces, we're going to go totally stripped back. We're going to. Oh, sorry, am I going up?
Okay, now you're back. Yes.
Yeah, you were going. You were sort of popping in and out, sort of roboting a bit.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. But not now.
Okay. So sorry, I was just saying that if you look at this, this is a Dutch church, and this is the no.
Yes, go on. Oh, you seem to have lost your.
Can you just keep on talking for a second?
Okay, so basically, what you're getting is you're getting lots of new art, which is depicting the interiors of churches, the interiors of buildings, and so forth. You have the rise of the conversation piece. So you have the introduction of subjects such as the mistress of the house with her servants, which is something that you see in Vermeer. In Vermeer, you also get things like paintings of servants themselves, like the famous one of the milkmaid. The milkmaid is quite an interesting painting because it's supposed to be an allegory of Dutch frugality, because what would happen was the bread would go stale, and then it would be, and then what would happen is you would the servants would make a sort of a pudding out of it by adding milk to it. So it was not wasteful at all. So it was a symbol of frugality, and was supposed to be a sort of symbol of Dutch practicality.
I should be back now. Hello?
Yes, you are back.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah. So what I was trying to say, I didn't know how much you heard me about with the
that's
church.
That's a copy.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's not the original. That's the original. That's not the original. That's the original. Yes, although very small. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a larger resolution painting, but. Yeah, like I think part of the whole kind of Dutch aesthetic was stripped back and simple, again in contradiction to the kind of bombastic, Baroque, Rococo, over the topness of Catholicism as well. So even the kind of art that you're buying and commissioning says who you are as a person and your kind of political and cultural views. Just on that, from going back to textiles and fashion again. What's interesting in the 17th century in England and also kind of the Protestant countries is the total move away from those kind of luxurious silks that we talked about, because they're so associated with Italy and with Rome, basically. So all of the velvets go, and everyone just starts wearing black, because black is actually a very expensive dye during that time period. So it's still like luxury and high status, but it's kind of super kind of stripped back, for example. So there's no potpourri about it whatsoever.
Yeah, and Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker has told us to remember our local milkmaid. So that's a message from the other side, from the other AA, the fake AA. I'm the real AA, and he's the fake AA.
It is fascinating because you think about with the Dutch, and this is one thing I think about from another perspective, is because of the piety that this new Dutch nation, independent of Spanish and the Habsburgs and such, was obviously their party was Calvinism, and Calvinism, as you pointed out, was it limited the I guess, sort of the artistic expression of what could be in a church, to such an extent that it was, limited to really near enough nothing of significance. And so it was forced, art and the legacy of the Renaissance was forced into people's homes. And so I just think that probably the secularization of, especially with the Dutch, of art, and sort of the artistic, maybe in the Protestant world at least, was more to do with the church, that particular church reaction to art. And so I just wonder if it was, the secularization was actually more caused predominantly just by the church rejecting it outright for biblical or scriptural reason.
Yeah, I mean it's a sort of, it works in parallel, doesn't it? It's the reduction of the theological rejection of iconography by the church, by the established church, the new established church of the Dutch Republic. And then you've also got the rise of the mercantile class and of the trading. And so therefore you have a boom in the growth of the middle class, who want to spend money on luxuries, and they also want to display their culture and learning. But it's also interesting that you do get a culture of banquet pieces. So you do have scenes of luxurious banquets. So it's quite interesting that you don't necessarily, although you get Puritanism, you also get these great feasts of the most fantastic sort of cheeses and fish and lobsters and so forth. So you have a great abundance of food and wealth, but you also get this balanced with a degree of sobriety in dress. But of course, when you look at their clothing, it's actually quite finely made and quite finely detailed. It may be restrained in style, but it's like, the little black dress of the 1950s or whatever. It's sort of, so it's restrained, but it's definitely high quality. So they're marking out their quality, and with the lace, which of course could be extremely expensive. This was a demonstration of not only sort of simplicity and a rejection of sort of the excesses of popery, but also a sort of subtle, ostentatious display of wealth as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, their trading network, especially with the competing with the earliest form of the British East India Trading Company, or probably then of the English East India Trading Company, meant that there was a good portion of society in the Netherlands were elevated to, I guess you could say, like the Medici level oligarchy, if you want, and so you had this sort of birth of, I guess, sort of, as we said, just things beyond church, because and that's the other thing. I think at this point the church wasn't the center of culture, especially for the Dutch at that point. And so as we said, banquets, or their servants in their homes, and or even, I mean, there's one that I remember, it was of what was it, the bull, that was it. That was a painting of Paulius Potter, I think, the bull. And
yeah, that's right. Yes, you get livestock painting, which comes up in this period, and then this also becomes very big in England in the sort of 18th century as well.
Yeah, because they sort of look towards the peasantry. I wouldn't actually. It's not fair. I wouldn't call them the peasantry at that point. I guess you would say like the sort of farming laboring classes, I guess you would say. tenement farmers and such. They sort of they sort of take I guess inspiration of in the lowest in society, financially lowest I should say, in society. There isn't so much the sort of beyond, because obviously none of this is secularized paintings, but even within the secularized paintings, you still see elements of the Calvinism sort of peeking through, because they don't take a lot of these paintings. You don't see great sort of austere, austerities and sort of grand palaces and wealth, these wealthy families or anything. It's still sort of very basic paintings of ordinary people and farmers and maids and such.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I guess this kind of probably goes into the kind of explosion of landscapes as well that we'll see in a bit. One thing I also wanted to bring up was, I don't know if you've seen the kind of Cabinet of Curiosity Dutch paintings, which I really love. So this is kind of like Dutch families would have in their houses, especially the merchants and traders, a small cabinet where they would have these curios and little collection of items that they've picked up in their travels, basically. So we've got things like coral across here, skulls. So just like loads of little things. So these are kind of like material culture, little bits of artwork from
an insect, an exotic insect.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just a little stag beetle across there. So again, the house becomes this little. You'd have these little, almost altar to art and to and this shows you that you're a worldly man, you're a trader. Like look at all these paintings of the ship zooming off in the distance.
And this is obviously related to the Dutch international trading, the Dutch Empire. It's also to do with the rise of scientific theory and an interest in science. And also you have to remember that the Dutch were very highly advanced in things like lenses and optics and so forth. And so this was something that came up again and again in paintings and became a matter of great pride for the Dutch, was their development of technology.
Exactly. Yeah. Guys, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to finish this a little bit sooner than I hoped, because I have to pop off for some family stuff. But okay. Maybe we could do a part 2 on this, and hopefully go from the 17th century to the modern times as well, because we haven't even touched any of that at all. So
yeah, I think it's good that we stop early rather than trying to cover too much in at the end.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thanks everyone who's been on. Any kind of closing remarks on this, Alex?
No, it's just it's been a great pleasure to talk about this. There's a great deal more that we can talk about, sort of especially the 19th century, the rise of social realism and then socialist realism and so forth. I would just say, if you enjoyed this stream, perhaps subscribe to Pharaoh's channel and like this video and show him a bit of support.
Thank you. And also buy Alex's book. I will put the link in description afterwards as well.
Thank you very much.
Al, thanks for coming on. What was any reflections on what we've seen so far?
Well, I mean, I like the Jesus with the cape. That's my favorite Jesus. I mean, in all seriousness, no. I mean, it's been really actually good going through the political backstories for a lot of work throughout the eras, and I think I really enjoyed it actually tonight, because you learn a lot really through all this, and I mean, you get to see all your favorite sort of historical people's egos play out on the in paintings and such. I mean, like the Cesare Borgia and such. I mean, the fact that he sort of compares himself to Jesus probably tells you as much as you want to know about the sort of fellow that he was. But no, I mean, as Alexander said, subscribe to Pharaoh, because it's really fun channel actually. The fact that you're covering all this sort of art, history of art and such. Yeah, I mean, it's really good.
Al, you've got your channel as well. Do you want to give a quick 1 minute?
Oh, yes. So what I do on my channels, we have like the weekly blog watch, which is going through latest political events. Currently, the next one should be next week with Rubber. So we're going to be talking about the distant right and the right and the sort of emerging civil war with the two factions. And I also do like politics of like fictional factions, like in video games, TV, books, that sort of stuff. So I need to talk to Night Cringe Walker actually about next video, which he's recommending. I'll try and get him on at some point, but no, that's about it really.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, just from my inside, I think it's art and power and politics just all kind of merged together so often and kind of used in different ways, whether that's kind of pulling from the past and showing we were related to these people or we believe in this. It's kind of a reflection of values, it's identity, it's trying to paper over the fact that you're a horrific warlord by showing that you're just this nice guy.
And that you've got nice white gloves, which are definitely not black gloves.
Literally, gloves not covered in the blood stain of your victims, basically. But like I said, hopefully we'll do this again soon, and we'll carry on from the 17th century onward to the modern period. So thanks very much, and catch you later.
Cheers.
Bye.